As many of us know, grief and loss are not mutually exclusive. We welcome back our guest, Heidi Dunstan, grief educator, widow, and author of Lean In, New Ways to Connect and Cope with Grief and Loss, to talk about the difference and how to support those who are experiencing these very profound changes in their life. Well, glad to have you back here with us. And last week, we were talking about suffering a loss, usually of a person in your life, and how to relate to somebody and to be there for them. But there are many types of loss and many reasons why we grieve in life. So why don't we talk a little bit about some of those other differences?
Sounds good. Yeah, a lot of people think that grief is just about death, but I mean, it's September. A lot of parents are sending their kids off to college, and it's empty nest syndrome, or people are moving through pet loss or divorce or changes in relationships, changes with friendships. All of those come with grief themselves as well, and people need to recognize them. Some of the other ones that are significant are things like families that have parental alienation or even addiction. A lot of parents that are dealing with kids that are struggling with addiction deal with anticipatory grief. And so there's lots of different types of grief, and it looks different. And sometimes it's really nice just to be able to know those so that you can acknowledge them with the people that you care about.
Yeah, another type of loss I think about is loss of a job, you know, and the fear that comes along with all of that too. It tends to kind of snowball some of the initial stages of feelings, and then it turns into other things.
For sure.
So how do you support somebody? We talk a lot about just being there for the person, and you're saying to provide space. How did you put it again?
To hold space.
To hold space. What does that mean?
It means just really seeing somebody. Sometimes it's even just acknowledging, hey, that has to be hard right now.
Yeah.
I see that this isn't an easy time for you. Can make such a big difference. You know, I recently had a friend who just had a mastectomy due to breast cancer. And I said, you know, you're grieving the loss that your body is different. And she just sighed, and she was like, nobody's actually told me that, and you're right.
Wow.
I am. I'm missing part of my body.
Yeah.
And our health does that, right? When we break a leg or when we deal with a significant health diagnosis, we grieve the fact that we used to be different. Many of us in our 40s grieve the fact that we need to buy eyeglasses to read, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's that simple. It's around us everywhere.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you provided your friend, though, was an acknowledgement. You weren't trying to sweep things under the rug. You weren't trying to change the subject. You weren't trying to get her mind off of things. You were simply acknowledging the reality of the situation. Why is it that we as a human species tend to go the opposite direction, that we're always trying to ignore the problem and try to help either that person or yourself move on?
Because we like things to be perfect. We like, you know, a friend phones you and says, hey, I'm sad today, and you want to cheer them up, when really it's okay that they're sad. And we always want to fix it. And when we're grieving, sometimes the way to fix it is to acknowledge it so they can move through the emotions.
Right.
We almost do what's opposite of what's needed.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Something that I wanted to ask you last week, but I'll ask you today is, and you bring it up, how do you bring, or should you bring, levity to the situation? That's my go-to.
Depends on who it is and where they're at. You know, I remember the day that my husband passed, and I phoned a colleague that I was working for to say, hey, my life's changed. And he did his levity, and it just wasn't quite the right time. It had only been hours, right? So, but he didn't know that. We were on the phone. But you know, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And so when it doesn't, own it and be like, I'm not so good at this. I just stuck my foot in my mouth and the salt and pepper shaker. Make it fun.
Yeah, exactly.
And kind of, and say, you know, please know that you're important to me. That I didn't mean to hurt you.
Yeah, I know. There are appropriate times to use it and there are inappropriate times to use it. And to talk about loss and grieving for adults is one thing. How do you address it amongst children?
I like to actually be real with kids. I like to use real language. You know, I don't like to say, you know, your dad is sleeping, because now they fear sleep. It's like, hey, your dad has died. We tend to even gloss over as adults, they passed away. We tend to not be really real with kids or adults. We pretend like it's just smooth.
Sure.
And so be real with them.
And what about, that's loss of a loved one. What about loss of the game? My team just lost the game. What do you do?
Acknowledge
that's
it.
okay, little Johnny, you know.
I acknowledge the feelings.
Yeah.
You know, I know you worked really hard. This has to hurt.
Yeah.
When we work I call it our grief muscle. When we work it with kids, or when we work it when it's not about death or those sticky ones, we actually get better at being able to be able to support people in the sticky ones. So acknowledge the feelings. Hey, I see that's hard.
Yeah.
You know, when you have to take the teenagers' internet away.
Right. Yeah.
I see this makes you angry.
Yeah.
I see that you don't have a lot of control. I see that this isn't easy.
And then the next step is, but let's do this thing better so that we don't have to do this again.
Yeah, trying to avoid the platitudes, trying to, I mean, in death, lots of people say, oh, but so-and-so would want you to.
Sure.
Well, that's not always appropriate. Sometimes it's like, hey, I see this is hard.
Yeah.
And that's all you have to say. There doesn't have to be a but. There doesn't have to be anything else. It could just be, this is hard.
Sure, absolutely. Where do people find your book?
You can find the Blue Talks book on Amazon.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much,
Thanks
Heidi.
so
Great
much.
to have you back.
Thanks.
We're
Bye-bye.
back in 2 minutes.